Hello, and welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast. Angel Aloma, Executive Director of Food for the Poor based in South Florida, will be sharing with us today about building and growing a mid-level donor program. If you're interested in learning how to be a deliberate nonprofit leader, I encourage you to follow the tips Whitney Bishop has put together for us. You can learn more and access the first tip at nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. Just look for the Are You Leading by Design tab. All the information's there.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Leaders Network podcast, where your host, KIRSTEN Bullock, interviews nonprofit CEOs and executive directors to share what's working. This podcast is produced every 2 weeks, and show notes are found at www.nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. Come back often, and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Any links we talk about will be listed in the show notes. Now, let's get on with the show.
Thank you so much, Angel, for joining me today.
It is my pleasure.
Angel Aloma has been with Food for the Poor since 2000, and prior to that, he spent 28 years as a teacher. You can read his full bio on the podcast page at nonprofitleadersnetwork.com. And to help provide our listeners with some context for our conversation, could you share a few words about Food for the Poor?
Sure. We are a 34-year-old charity, so it makes us a pretty old, I'm not sure how many years that is in charity years, but 34 years is a long time. We started out with just food, hence our name, but since that time, our name has become somewhat of a misnomer because we also build homes now. We dig water wells. We do water projects with cisterns. We also are involved with food, of course, which is our signature thing. We send hundreds and thousands of containers of food every year. We are also involved with education and medical, and we do self-sustainable projects. We are involved. We work in 17 countries in the Caribbean and Latin America, and we're right in our backyard, so to speak. And we do all this with an administrative cost ratio of less than 5% for the last 6 or 7 years, which means that more than 95% of all donations go directly to programs that help the poor.
Wow. And about how many staff and volunteers do you have to help run those programs?
We have very few volunteers because our work is mostly abroad. So we have some people like retired or kids looking for service hours for school who will come and stuff envelopes or open envelopes and things like that. But we have 324 members of staff here in Coconut Creek. And then we have 85 priests and pastors who go to churches every weekend to preach on behalf of the poor for us.
Wow, that's a phenomenal team that you've been able to build.
Yes, we last year we sent over $1 billion of aid to the 17 countries that we serve. Our main countries, by the way, are Jamaica, Haiti, and Dominican Republic in the Caribbean. Then in Central America, we have Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador. And then we help a lot of smaller countries also, but like St. Lucia, for example, has only 75,000 population. So when you send a couple containers there, it lasts a long time. Haiti, on the other hand, in half an island, has 10.2 million people. So there is not enough that we can send there, to be able to fulfill the need.
Mm-hmm. Now, on your website, I noticed that Food for the Poor has both an executive director and a president CEO. Could you share a little bit about the delineation of the responsibilities for those two positions?
Absolutely. The president came from a very strong commercial background, merchant background. So he oversees a very, very active in-kind gift program, a goods-in-kind program. He's also in charge of purchasing. He knows a tremendous amount about shipping, all of which we do very much. HR answers to him also. Then on my side of things, I'm in charge of all the fundraisers. We have 13 different fundraising departments, and all the directors of those departments answer to me. I am also the spokesperson for the organization, so I do all interviews, and I also have a relationship with many of the major donors in the organization, so I keep in touch with them. I attend many conferences here and abroad, and I present at some of those conferences about fundraising, and I learn a lot at some of those conferences also about fundraising.
Great. And when we had talked previously, you mentioned that you had a great success in creating a mid-level donor program. What does that look like for you?
Well, we have the good fortune that we have our own internal call center that has 71 people working in it. And so basically the phone, we all know, is a very excellent tool for fundraising. So we use it to very much in the advantage of being able to move donors up from the lower level to the mid-program, from the mid-program to the higher level, and eventually from the higher level to the major gifts program. So basically we have callers who we will mail a beautiful piece, a beautiful appeal, and then these callers will call. There are some that call people from $50 to $99, which is the lowest level. And then we have those who will call people from $100 to $599, and that is split. Half of them are on predictive dialer, whereas the other half now actually the upper part of that portfolio from $300 to $599, they actually, each caller has a portfolio of callers where they try to build relationships at that level, individual relationships with the donors. All the callers who call, offer thanks and prayers to the donors. We're a Christian ministry, so we have a very strong prayer ministry involved with it. And then there is the level that goes from $600 to $3,200, which is the price of a home that we build, a single unit home. So they all are on portfolios, so they have relationships with the people that they call. The same callers call the same people all the time, so they build relationships with them, and from there they go to the highest level of the phone center, which is basically from $3,200 to $15,000. And that level is the level that's very important to us, because from there, they feed the major gifts program. Once they have hit 15,000 or a single gift of 10,000, at the end of the year, they're transferred over to the major gifts program. So basically, the whole impetus of the call center is not so much just the money that they get in. They don't do acquisitions, so it's basically fundraising and prayer and thanks, but it's really who they can move up the ladder, who they can improve, whom they can cultivate to the point where they can graduate to the next level. So it's every single level feeding the next, which has been very successful for us. Where direct mail is concerned, we have a very aggressive mail program, and we have, of course, dynamic asks. So when a donor gives, for example, if he has been giving $25 and we see a gift of $50 come in, then those asks, all from computer work and from analysis and from technical support from IS, that donor, his first ask the next time will be $50, then a stretch ask of $75, then back to his last gift before that, which is $25, and then your own amount, your sacrificial gift, your own amount after that. So basically, the direct mail also tends to move up the donors from one level to the next, with those dynamic asks. We make sure that our copy is very, very donor-centric. We discovered, many years ago, about 5-6 years ago, what true donor centricity was about. I went to Holland to this conference, and it took the trip all the way to Holland to have an American inspire me with that, who was presenting at the conference. Since that time when I came back, I edit everything that comes out of here in writing. So I make sure that we stop talking about us and about the organization and about what we do, but rather talking about what the donor does, what his contribution means, and so forth and so on. And it really has worked out tremendously for us in cultivating donors. We did what we call an emotional inquiry study by an outside firm, where they interview our donors to see really why they give. And one of the main reasons, the top reason actually, was because they want to feel good about themselves. So if we are constantly talking about food for the poor instead of talking about them and their contributions to the poor, if we don't eliminate the word help, like thank you so much for helping Food for the Poor build homes. No, it's thank you for building homes. Thank you for supplying clean water to the poor, not thank you for helping Food for the Poor do this, So basically we achieve that of having the donor feel good, and that's why our thank you program is so tremendously successful. When we send a thank you, which is tremendous for a mid-level program and cultivating them higher, is when we send a thank you within 3 days of it arriving here, that thank you goes out to the donor. So they get a thank you within a week. And that thank you is really making the donor feel good again. And we make, with it, we don't make an ask in our thank you, but we put a reply piece with an envelope separately, in the same envelope, of course, that they get the thank you in. And we make 7% of our income from thank yous.
Wow, that's incredible.
Because again, it goes back to the point that, that the emotional inquiry study told us that the donor is feeling good, so they want to help again.
Absolutely. You said that you heard from an American about the donor centricity in Holland. I'm assuming that was at the International Fundraising
IFC,
Congress?
the International Fundraising Congress,
yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And his name was Tom Ahern.
Yes. Tom Ahern has done a lot of writing about that, and Penelope Burke as well, who some of our listeners might be familiar with.
Yes, I have read a lot of Penelope also.
Okay.
Recently, I have gone to reading sales books, because the salespeople, the commercial world can afford to spend a tremendous amount of money that we would be killed by the watchdogs and the public if we ever even tried to spend 1% of that in research. So I figured, let me read the commercial world's literature and see what I can steal from that. So one of my last presentations at the Direct Marketers Association was To Steal is Human, and it's basically talking about all the things from the commercial world that they have already researched that we can actually apply to the nonprofit world.
That's neat. And I've also seen lately how some commercial folks are coming into the nonprofit world and borrowing some things that we've come up with.
Absolutely. I mean, the idea now you hardly ever see a commercial on television that doesn't have a story to it.
Right.
Of course, theirs are made up and ours are real, but it's amazing that we are hesitant to use them when we actually have them. And the commercial world is happy to make them up to get people to become emotional and therefore to give, because basically, or to buy in their case, because we know that it takes emotion to actually, the right brain is the one that has to get emotional and decide, yes, I'm going to save this child, or I'm going to save the environment, or I'm going to save these animals.
Absolutely. Now, could we talk a little bit more about the call center? And
sure.
Is that
Absolutely.
a call center that you run, or is that?
We have it internally. Yes, it's ours.
Okay.
We have a lot of internal stuff here. We have our own creative in-house, so we have our own photographers, our own writers, our own editors, our own graphic designers. Then we also have our own call center, and we have our own caging also, which allows us to send a thank you immediately as we get the donation. We send out the thank yous within 3 days, as I said.
Nice. So what kind of training do you provide for the callers?
Well, we tend to hire people, preferably with experience of call centers. What we have to do mostly is switch the paradigm from sales to prayer, to thanks, to talking to a donor about donating, to inspire a donor to tell a story. And of course, we have a lot of help from the scripts, but we like them to, be able to feel comfortable and not just be reading robotically. So we have systems, of course, that we can listen to the phone calls and then talk to them about, we have the managers in the department who have much more experience in telemarketing. And so they basically, listen to their phone calls, particularly when they're more new and, less experienced. And that's how we do a lot of the training.
Okay, just on the job, listening in.
On the job, yes.
And as far as your mid-level donor program, you've gone over a lot of things that are super successful already. Is there a single area that really stands out as your greatest success?
I think that we didn't have a major gifts program for 28 of our 34 years because we were doing so well on the phone that we thought, this is it. We have reached our max. We were getting gifts of $200,000, $150,000 on the phone. So we thought that's major gifts. And so we were kind of like, to some degree, moved to think that we couldn't do any better. Then I went to a conference and heard this lady speaking about the fact that when you go from letter to phone, you can triple your donation. When you go from phone to personal visits with major gifts, you can triple your donation again. So I thought, wow. So I decided to hire this young lady who was so eloquent and so good about this to be our first vice president of major gifts, and she turned me down. So I said, okay, how about if you work as a consultant for us? And she did for 6 months, and she fell so in love with our ministry that she asked after 6 months if that job opening was still available, and I said absolutely. So she started really our major gifts program then, and so we traveled together. I introduced her to all the people that I had been speaking to on the phone, that visiting and so forth and so on. And what is really amazing is that her first portfolio came from the phone center, and the next year, the phone center still maintained the same amount of income, while the major gifts people brought in $11 million from those donors that they took from there. So it was like amazing that from people who were giving 200,000, they were getting 600,000 and 400,000 now, and it's, so that's kind of like what I feel has been one of our large successes. We have had many of them, but they kind of also, some of the biggest successes kind of speak of our failures, like the one not to have a major gifts program for 28 years. Right. And of course, the other, what I consider to be the most horrible thing is the silos. And that took a long time to break down. So that I also figure one of our major successes. It's still a work in progress. But about 3 years ago, I went to another conference, and the speaker started out by saying, he spoke for about an hour, and his first sentence was, if you don't dream the impossible, you will never achieve what is difficult. And I just turned my papers around on the table on the blank side of it that weren't printed, and I wrote a 4-page new paradigm for fundraising without silos at Food for the Poor. And I came back from there and opening it up to all the fundraisers who were a little bit upset because there'd be no ownership of the donor anymore. The mission would own the donor if anyone, and the donor would own us. And so I gave them a chance to give their opinions and stuff like that. But I had to act a little bit as a benevolent dictator and say, okay, once we have discussed it, once we have accepted, once we have changed and tweaked, that bus is moving, and you either have to be on the bus or off the bus. And mercifully, they all came on the bus, and we're still, every now and then there's a little tweak here and there, but we have come such a long way where silos are concerned. And at one time, we had actually given up on it. We had thought, no, this just can't be helped. And that one comment at the conference helped to change it.
Were there some specific things that you did, or it sounds from the way you say it, it sounds like it just happened by itself.
It didn't. It was a very long and arduous process. For example, our web was a totally fundraising department, and when a direct mail campaign would go on the web, there were 2 donation pages. One that was for the URL, the credit of which would go to the department, to direct mail, and the other was a different, without a URL, just for people who came on the web and went to it. But one of the most difficult things about fundraising is attribution. But we all know that people who are acquainted with the web hardly ever use URLs. We tend to go on the web and just find it. And so basically the web was getting total credit for this. And then all that changed. We still have the 2 pages, but both go to the department that has the campaign. And there the web is acting solely as a service department. And then we change it from 80% fundraising to 20% service to 80% service to other fundraising departments and 20% fundraising of their own, which has worked magnificently. The web has done better every single year since. And all the other departments now are encouraging people to go on the web because, again, they're not scared of losing their income for their campaigns. So that was just one department. So we had, of course, then to encourage to say, all right, there's a yin and a yang. We had to encourage the other departments to send people to the web, not to be afraid of losing, but, to thinking of the donor as a multi-channel donor, understanding that is what the best donor is when they're multi-channel. And, well, it's 3 years now, and we're still working on it, but it's come a long, long way. Attitudes. You know what they say, that culture eats innovation for lunch? It's hard to change that. So it was quite an uphill battle, but we are winning it.
Good. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And I'm writing down that quote. I think that was, I don't know who said it, but the culture eats innovation for lunch.
Right.
Do you know who said that?
I have no idea who said it,
okay.
but I've heard it said in the industry. I've heard people in the sector saying it, and it's so true. What you're accustomed to, I mean, it's true of all human beings, I think. I am accustomed to doing certain things at home, and it's very difficult for me to change from what becomes habitual becomes set in stone until you get a good pickaxe and start breaking away at it.
mm-hmm. So if you were to start this whole program over again, if you were going to build it from scratch, would you do anything differently?
Well, yes. You always learn from experience, so hopefully you will not make the same mistakes again. I would definitely have started earlier with other forms of acquisition, such as direct mail, because direct mail is still very much so the bread and butter of our sector. I mean, for us, it brings in 42% of the net income. And as I told you, we have 13 fundraising departments, so that's a huge chunk of income that direct mail starts. Of course, we have some disadvantages with direct mail as other methods become more popular, but whatever disadvantages we might have, our use of data has been so advanced now where we can do modeling and we can do different things that will help direct mail. So basically, back then even more so, we at first started just with the speakers going out on Sundays and bringing in donors. Now, and they're much better donors, of course, that come from the church, but the direct mail donors, we can get them in much larger quantities. So I would have started direct mail a lot earlier. Of course, I wasn't here for that, but I would have also started other forms of acquisition. I would have been more careful of our lapsed donor files. I would have been trying to get better customer service. So basically, improving in any way possible what we have as an organization, as a ministry. The prayer program is one that I would have also developed earlier. We have a great success. Our donors really love the fact that whenever they send in a prayer request, all of our appeals go out with a prayer request. And when they send them to us, we actually call them and pray with them on that request. It's not just, we get thousands of them every month, and it's not just putting them in a basket and laying hands over them. We actually call the donors and, make it very personal. So I would have maybe started, that as early as possible and developed that a bit more. But I would say that our growth rate was so heavy from the start that in a way we may not have wanted to grow much faster, because there might have been other issues. We were doubling our income every 3.25 years. So that really was, wonderfully done. So I am now using, things. I'm only here 15 years. So the organization is 34 years old. So there were 19 years when I wasn't here at all, so it's easy for me to say I would have done this, I would have done that. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that they did a wonderful job of growing in the organization with the tools they had at that time. We have much more analysis at our, in our hands now than they did then. So basically the use of this is what I would have encouraged if, of course, I knew then what I know now.
Mm-hmm. And it's easy to say that looking back.
Absolutely. Hindsight is 20/20, as they say.
Yes. Do you have any closing words of encouragement or inspiration for other nonprofit leaders before we close?
Absolutely. I think two things in the nonprofit world that are very, very, very important for all of us. And one is donor centricity, which involves no silos, which involves truth, which involves transparency. If you want to be donor-centric, the donor has to be in charge of what he wants to give to and what channel he wants to give it through. And the second one is equally important, is buoyancy. It's the ability in a sector that has so much rejection. When you think about it, KIRSTEN, for every piece of mail we send, we jump for joy when we get a 10% response. But at the same time, it means that 90% did not respond to it. In our phone center, for every one yes that they get 30 no's. So, it's a sector that is filled with rejection, and we have to focus on our mission to be able to rise above that rejection and be able to feel